I have been unbelievably amazed at the jobs that the interns have gotten and some of the rotations that they've had. They've just been so impressive. It's unbelievable.
Do you ever have so many questions and no one to ask, so they're just wasting away on Google searches you'll forget about in an hour or so?
We had that same problem, and that's why we created the RD2BE podcast, a resource for dietetic and nutrition students looking for answers that their peers don't have.
We are students Macy and Emily and registered dietitian Carl Barnes. We engage in conversations and learn from RDs.
Join us weekly as we gain insight into the unique journeys of registered dietitians all over the country.
Welcome back to the RD2BE podcast. I'm your registered dietitian host, Carl Barnes. This is our weekly podcast where we sit down with a different awesome registered dietitian to showcase the diversity of opportunity in the profession. And this week, we're actually sitting down to feature a dietetic internship, which are some of our most popular series as you are students oftentimes pursuing applying to dietetic internships and navigating that fun experience, if you will. So we're honored to be sitting down with Gina Wack today. She's the director of the Gulf Coast Dietetic Internship. Really excited to learn more about the program and kind of learn about the pathways and all of that. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
And I'm Jenna, your RD2BE. So Gina, could you first give us an educational background and your professional experience, just so that people kind of have an idea of your what you've done in the profession?
Certainly. I went the coordinated undergraduate route. So my DPD and my internship were together. I worked for probably close to 10 years before I went back and got my master's. And I am a huge advocate of getting a master's, but I like that working before you get it because I think it just turns the light bulb on for you and says, oh, that's why I had to learn that. So I am a real advocate of working prior to getting your master's, but unfortunately that's gone by the wayside.
Awesome. And so given that you're the director of the Gulf Coast Dietetic Internship, what made you decide to create it in the first place?
Okay, I was on the ASCEND board, the accreditation board, and because of that, I was very in the know of what was going on with the standards. And when they decided to allow freestanding programs, I am a freestanding program. I am not affiliated with the university. They kind of snuck that in there, but because I was always on the website, and my business partner and I were always doing accreditation documents, we learned of the fact that they were allowing those to be developed. So I said, oh my gosh, this is perfect for us. We have a background in accreditation. We have backgrounds in education. We both had been directors for programs in the past. And so we wrote it. And we said, here you go. This is it. It was perfect for us. And I will just give this little nudge here to the association. I am not a member of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics because they made me mad with the name change, but that's a big long story. But I am a huge advocate of being involved if you're young. I do not have a job or have not had a job that in some shape, form, or fashion didn't come from being involved in the Dietetic Association. So I did it because I developed the internship because I learned that I could do it, that it was a possibility to do it. So we wrote it under the umbrella of my consulting business.
Awesome. And so you kind of mentioned how you had that background experience with having that accreditation. You kind of had a job already in that position. And so when you developed all these skills before making the internship, what were some things that transferred over that you learned from past jobs that you were kind of able to apply in making the internship? And like, how exactly did you make the internship?
Well, this first one, the internship, the accreditation was not a job. It was, I volunteered. I was a reviewer for accreditation, and then I was selected to be on the board. So I had a tremendous amount of experience from that. So my giving to the association gave me tremendous numbers of skills. And so because I did accreditation, because I was very aware of accreditation and had experience in being a program director, they all just meshed together. So the two went together. All I had to do was know how to write a self-study. And then the curriculum is basically given to us because in the form of the competencies. So there are certain, in the DPD, there are knowledge requirements that you have to meet. And then in the internship, there are competencies that you have to meet. And so the curriculum, that is a curriculum, or the competencies and how to meet those.
Awesome. And we kind of want to get more into like the meat and potatoes of your
Okay.
dietetic internship and things like that. And so kind of just to get a snapshot view, how many interns typically apply to your program and how many do you typically accept each cycle?
Okay, we are relatively new, so our numbers have grown each cycle. Last cycle, we probably had 45 to 50. We accept 30 a year, and it's usually about 15 or 20 the first time, and then the remainder that next one that year. So we are in the fall and the spring match. So we match probably about 20 the first time, and then we fill the remainder on the next match for our
Awesome.
third.
And your internship is distance, correct?
It is a distance internship. The hard part about our internship is that you have to secure your own rotations. The good thing about our internship is that you get to secure your own rotation. This way you choose yourself what you want to do instead of going to where I tell you you have to go. You do it yourself. We have a clinical, food service, and community, just like everybody else. And then we have an elective, and that elective should be used for you to say, oh, I'm really interested in this. I'd like to get a little exposure here. So that allows you a rotation into something that you really like, instead of me saying, okay, for your elective, this is where you're going to go. You know, for your community, this is where you're going to go. So it is a difficult task, but it has tremendous benefits to it. It forces you to step outside your comfort zone. It forces you to start your network. Dietetics is a hugely small world. And so networking is very, very important. And so it begins those processes for you. So it's bad or scary. Let me say that. It's scary. But it really and truly is very beneficial to you.
And I like how you describe the dietetics world as like hugely small, because it's huge in the sense of you have so many opportunities with like whoever you connect with, but it's small in the fact of your professor can also know your next person that you're working for. Like it's that awesome connection.
Oh, certainly. And for me, it's even more so because I have all of these interns that I've dealt with, and now they're professionals and they refer other interns to me. And then they end up being preceptors. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience, but it is very small. It's very small.
Oh yeah. And
So don't
hopefully
burn
like,
bridges.
Oh yeah. And like over time, the profession, definitely with the things happening, it should grow over time, and more internship opportunities, more distance opportunities like yours, that's going to have more flexibility for students. And so one thing that I definitely saw that stood out about your internship was the length that it takes.
That's nice, isn't it?
Yeah, because if I'm not mistaken, yours can be done in as little as 6 months and 24 weeks.
That's correct. Now, that doesn't, we also have that 1 week orientation. It's not an entire week. We have now moved it to 3 days from 2 to get in those new competencies that are really difficult to get in on site, such as the insertion of an NG tube and the swallow eval and the CBG monitoring, those things. So those will be covered in orientation. So it is 3 days. The other 2 days are work, where you work with the interns, but it is not on site. You do it via telephone or email or texting. So we also allow prior learning. So if you have prior learning, you can do it in less than 24 weeks.
And we were actually going to have one question about the prior learning, but we can absolutely discuss it now. So I feel like that's definitely a new term that I've heard circulating around, like prior learning credit, that a lot of dietetic internships are doing. And so if you don't mind, in case someone has just heard this word and they're like, what the heck does prior learning credit mean? Could you give a little background into what that exactly is and how it can apply to your internship?
Certainly. We give prior learning for community, food service, and the elective. We only give prior learning for clinical if you are a registered or a DTR. If you're a registered diet tech, and we will only give 200 hours. Our rotation for clinical is 400 hours. We will give you 200 hours in prior learning if you are a DTR and can meet competencies that are expected in the clinical rotation. In the food service and the community rotations, it's all or nothing. You either meet all of the competencies and you get those hours waived, or you don't get the hours waived. And you have to have worked 6 months at least full time, and it be paid employment. And then if you get, we'll send you our evaluation and our curriculum. And you go, what you would do is we have all the competencies on the left-hand side of our evaluation. And on the right-hand side, we have a column where you fill in the learning activities that you've done that met those competencies. And then in the middle column, your supervisor would evaluate you on a 4-point Likert scale. You have to have a 3 or a 4 to pass. If you don't have a 3 or 4, you don't get the prior learning. But the supervisor then evaluates you, and you submit that for us to evaluate and say yes or no, you do not meet the requirements. And then if you do, you get those hours. It would be 240 hours in food service management, 200 hours in community, or 120 hours in elective. And the elective really follows more along the community curriculum. That's the evaluation you would use would be the curriculum, but you don't have to meet all of those competencies.
I gotcha.
Some of those. That's 120 hours.
Wow, yeah. And so if someone was able to get all of those hours taken care of them, have you seen, I guess the good question to ask is, have you had an intern? Like, what's the shortest amount of time you've seen an intern complete your rotation?
We will only give 2 rotations in prior learning. Okay, so you can't have more than 2. So gosh, I can't give you the exact, I've never looked at it and see, but we have had people who've done it in 4 months.
Awesome. And yeah, and so with something so condensed and like super concentrated, how do you ensure the students, because you see a lot of students have like that year-long internship or like, 8 months and things like that. How do you ensure that they get that quality experience in such a concentrated amount of time?
Well, for it to be 4 months, for it to be that short, you would have to have prior learning. And our thought process is, if you have met these competencies, why would we ask you to do it again? If you have this experience and you've done these things, then why would we ask you to do it again? And then the others, we expect you to do 45 to 50 hours a week. I mean, that's just normal. We don't expect you to have a job. We don't expect you to do schoolwork at the same time. We expect you to get in there and hit the ground running and get it over and done with. And we have what's called the DI app, and weekly interns will submit journals for what they did that week, what activities they did, what competencies they met. And then we also have different forms that they fill out, like their population checklist and their disease state checklist, that allows us to see that they're meeting all those diseases that they have to have exposure to, and that they're being exposed to all the populations that they have to be exposed to. And so that weekly journal allows us to say, hey, you're not progressing like you need to. At this point in time, you really should be doing this, and this. And so it's that DI app just phenomenal as far as helping keep us up with the interns.
And it's great that you're kind of using technology in that way to help ensure that the interns, even though they're on this expedited route, they're still getting the support and resources that they need. And does your internship have a specific concentration, particularly in the rotations or the elective portion?
Okay, with the new standards, the concentration was done away with. So you don't have to have a concentration anymore. We started out as entrepreneurial because I am a firm believer that that is what's going to keep the profession going, is entrepreneurism. I have been unbelievably amazed at the jobs that the interns have gotten and some of the rotations that they've had. They've just been so impressive. It's unbelievable. And so we really do follow the entrepreneurial concentration, although there is not one, although there is not a concentration anymore, we still do have that one. For example, with food service, you don't have to do school food service, you don't have to do hospital food service. We think that a restaurant is a great experience for food service because they give you that uh, fiscal responsibility. They allow you to see how dietetics can act as a revenue generator and not always be a cost center. So we think that's a very, very good exposure for the interns. You're going to see the tray line when you're in the clinical. So, we don't worry about that. But what we're wanting you to get in that food service is management exposure anyway. That's what we'd like for you to see. And boy, we're happy to see you understand how it's important for you to be fiscally responsible.
Definitely. And you kind of gave us a couple of examples of the different types of rotations that people have had. But if anyone was curious, just like from what you've seen with past cycles, first, I kind of want to start off with that prior learning credit. Like, what are if someone's interested in doing prior learning credit, or they kind of have that in their mind now, what have you seen some students apply and get approved for with the prior learning credit?
The restaurant is always a big one because it allows them those management opportunities. They've been able to schedule, they've been able to procure, they've been able to plan and modify. So a restaurant is an excellent source. School food service, depending on how much you've been allowed to do in there, if you're a CDM, then oh my goodness, yes, that gives you everything you ever needed. So working in long-term care as a CDM or as a dietary manager, those are real good examples for food service. With community, maybe you have worked, most of ours in community have worked as a nutritionist in WIC. Those are very big ones. So food banks, as long as they've been full-time for at least 6 months, those usually meet all of the requirements for community, depending on how big a community center it is. Community centers are a real big one. They, if it's a very active community center in a certain population, they have great exposure, give you great exposure to those competencies that you need for community.
Awesome. And then going into the actual internship rotation, given that it's distance, a lot of things that people get really nervous and anxious about with distance is that they have to find the rotation sites. And so to kind of guide students into the right direction of where they should look, have you seen any common themes in the past with where a lot of interns have gone for their rotations that people could kind of use as inspiration on where to look?
Okay, with our internship, what I see is pockets. So we're a word of mouth internship. So we have pockets in different areas of the country where we usually pull our interns. And so they have networked with each other and they have gotten information from them. Where did you do your internship? Where did you do this rotation? Where did you do that rotation? So that certainly is very beneficial to them. What we tell interns is that you need to use your contacts. First and foremost, use your contacts. So if you know somebody in the hospital and the nursing home, contact them. I don't mean the dietitian. If you know the CEO, if you know the administrator, if you know the DON, contact those people. And then they will contact the dietitian for you and work with you to help bridge that gap. One thing that we also encourage our interns is that if you are in a populous area, then think about what's rural around you that doesn't have a lot of internships, because as a distance, we're fighting for slots. And so if you live in an area that has a lot of university internships, then they've got most of those hospitals all used up. So if you look around at the rural areas around you where they probably don't have interns, those are great opportunities. those one dietitian hospitals are wonderful. You get to do or have to do or whatever you want to use, everything. You get to do everything. You're on every committee known to man. You do all kinds of things. And so your experience is broad at a small hospital. Now, at a large hospital, you get to see a whole lot more diagnoses and a whole lot more procedures. And so there's plus and minuses for everything. But I think it really depends on where you are as to what we suggest that you do. But my number one suggestion is to use your contacts.
Yeah, and that's great advice. And I think it's definitely good for them to just have the idea of like seeing the context that they're in and then seeing which pro and which con to kind of dock away with that for sure. And so you did mention before that for interns to kind of graduate on time for their internship, they need to do about 45 to 55 hours per week.
45 to 50, yeah.
Yeah.
45 to 50.
Oh, yeah, my bad. Yeah, 45 to 50
That's
hours
okay.
45 to 50 hours per week. And so that number might sound a little intimidating for some students, especially if they've only done part-time and while in school for most of their career. And so do you have any resources and advice you give your interns for preparing and handling that workload of 45 to 50 hours?
I think that starts on our end where a distance is not for everybody. And we look at those people who have had exposure to distance in the past. Interns who are older usually are much less intimidated by those numbers. So I think a lot of that starts on our end, but my goodness, and I really hate to be sexist and I'll probably just get booed off the air, but male interns tend to have no fear whatsoever. 45 to 50 hours to them is just easy peasy. And they're the ones who generally end up finishing in 4 to 5 months.
I gotcha. And when it comes to the specific skills that you've seen in the interns that have made it through, have you seen specific traits and things that you have kind of noticed for the more successful interns?
I guess I would call it personality, but those people who are not afraid to get in there, like in the clinical, they'll get in there and they don't have to have the dietitian follow them around. They don't have to follow the dietitian around. They're going to get in there and they're going to meet the physicians and the nurses and the physical therapist and the speech therapist, and they're going to get in there and they're going to have more opportunities. Clinical is probably the one that's the hardest to get over 40 hours. Generally, dietitians don't work more than 40 hours a week. Restaurants, my goodness, they're open 24 hours a day, right? Not 24 hours, but they're open long hours. So I think those traits where you get in there and you're just not afraid to be told no. You have to realize that what doesn't kill us only makes us stronger. And I think those are the ones who really do it best. Those ones who have, and I think I use men because oftentimes they're the breadwinners and they have to get it done. They have to get it done because they've got to get a job. They have to start working. And so I guess that would be the personality traits I see that get it done the quickest, is those people who have time nipping at their heel.
And kind of like the get in and get out mentality.
Yes.
Of just you're there to do it and then you're there to kind of move on. And definitely I feel like with the clinical side of the internships and kind of just having that confidence to kind of go in and do it, definitely just with clinical in a hospital setting, it can be high stakes, high stress, just wherever you go. And so do you feel like there's a gray line between where an intern needs to make sure they don't overstep or make sure that they're not just being right behind the dietitian the whole time asking questions? And so when it kind of comes to finding that balance, is it more so just throwing yourself in and seeing what happens, or asking the right amount of questions? Like, how would you say that balance is, especially in the clinical side?
Okay, I think that's probably a very difficult thing to answer because it would be so different with everyone. But what I tell my interns is, I don't want a call from the preceptor. I do not want your preceptor to call me, unless they're calling me to tell me how great you are. So you're not the boss. The preceptor's the boss, And so the intern has to understand that he or she has got to stay within the parameters that that preceptor expects of them. But certainly if they can show that preceptor that they are competent, that they have the ability to interact with others and to show that dietitians can fit in very well in many, many instances, and that they are much more of a benefit than they are a hindrance, then I think that helps the intern if they can let the preceptor know that. But I would always caution my interns that you need to feel out that preceptor, and you don't step on the preceptor's toes.
Oh
Okay?
yeah, setting boundaries for sure.
Without a
And
doubt.
knowing where you can step.
That's right.
And with the 24 weeks, your site did mention that there can be gaps between the rotations due to kind of having trouble finding preceptors or trying to accommodate to different site locations. And so with this in mind, what would you say is the maximum time a intern could spend in your program? Like, is there a cutoff that they have, or is there like a limit to how long the gap can be between rotation sites? How does that exactly look?
So accreditation sets boundaries for you. They want interns to stay there no longer than 150% of the time that's expected. And so that really sets our boundaries for us. Now, life happens. We certainly have had tragedies and issues that have happened in lives. And so if the intern doesn't make it out in that 150% of the time, then we take the hit for that. But we certainly encourage interns, we stay on them about their hours. I will tell you that this year there is no playing around with that January 1st deadline out there looming for you to have your master's. There is no way we want anyone to ever get anywhere close to December and not be finished, because life does happen. And so we are going to be much less lenient, much less flexible this next time around. If you don't have a master's, we're going to be very, very inflexible, because we do not want anyone to finish the internship and then not be able to get a verification statement until they finished a master's, which would be another 2 years, and we just don't want to do that.
Yeah, and it wouldn't only burn it would just be a lose-lose on both sides.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes.
And so with that challenge, and you did mention that challenge in the future with the master's degree and kind of having to be more rigid in the future. When it comes to talking about the internship at the moment, have you seen interns encounter any common challenges? Because you did say that one challenge that you saw was with the clinical rotation sites being hard to find enough hours during the week. But have you seen any other examples of challenges that interns have had to face throughout the rotations?
Well, when I think about that, I think the biggest challenge is mine. A large number of our interns get jobs before they ever finish the internship. There are a large number of jobs out there. Now, I do encourage interns to be very mindful of the fact that there's more than one job available. So don't just take something, and don't undercut yourself as far as the salary is concerned. I mean, be realistic about it. You're not gonna start out making over 100,000. So, be realistic about it. But I think the biggest challenge is mine, and they'll get to a certain point where they just have the paperwork left to do, and they'll get a job, and then it's everything devoted to that job, and they're just kind of like, yeah, I'm getting the paperwork. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge. But I have been very impressed, very excited about the fact that there are a lot of jobs out there for dietitians.
Yeah, and I do think that over time it'll just keep growing and growing, just how most things do, which is exciting. And I think a good thing just for interns to keep in mind with yours is it's so short that it's why, it's 6 months or less, and kind of just powering through to get to the end.
Oh, you blink and it's over. My goodness.
And with how fast paced the environment can be as well, like with the food service, clinical, community, everything like that, for sure, it can just go by just like that. And so the last thing that we do want to end on is just what advice you would give as a dietetic internship director to RD2Bs and to students who are either looking into internship options, applying in the next round, just any advice you would give to those who are kind of looking into dietetic internships.
Okay, I think I'd like for my advice to be a lot earlier than when they're applying, because one of the big things, unfortunately, is that GPA. It correlates very closely to passing the RD exam, and the internships are held, well, DPDs and internships both are held to the pass rate on the RD exam. So that forces us to really narrow our selection based, and what we found time and time again is that the GPA does correlate with the ability to pass the RD exam. So I think that would be my early recommendation, is that you make sure that you keep that GPA up, because that's very, very important.
And then knowing the balance of making sure to focus on getting a good GPA, and then also I'm sure the extracurricular aspect as well, and always finding a balance with the two for sure.
Yes, and like, and I often tell interns when they, are asking about their personal statement, don't, and this is a personal issue, it may not be what any other dietitian looks at or any other program director looks at, but I like to see when you're doing your personal statement, don't tell me how your grandmother got diabetes and, it changed your life and you really want to save the world. What I want to know is, what do you plan to do for dietetics? What is it that you think you can give to the profession to grow the profession? I'm all about, patient care. I am a patient advocate from the get-go, but I am also an advocate of making sure that we are sustainable and that we look at the financial issues as well as everything else.
I think those are awesome words to end on, especially with the personal statement that a lot of students get kind of anxious about. But yes, thank you so much, Gina, for taking
Thank
time out of
you.
your day to talk about your internship. And I'm definitely excited to see potentially more interns apply and use the distance option for sure.
It saves them money, they don't have to move somewhere, they can stay right where they are, and it certainly does save money.
Yeah, and thank you again.
Thank you.